in our last episode, where we talked about what it was, the justice work that we did, how it got started, and the details of some of the things we did, and how justice work really is the work of a missionary. We talked about the name of Heart of Christ and how it came from Jesus being in the Garden of Gethsemane, in which he was sweating blood, feeling the oppression of the world, and he decided that he knew what his mission and his purpose was, and he got up full well knowing what it was that he was going to suffer in order to bring hope to people who suffer oppression. Today, I'm going to talk to you about what happened when we opened the office. At first, like I said, I thought that we were just going to be working in Tolunga, that it was just going to be a work where we worked in the city of Tolunga and in the county of Tolunga, but the reality was that we were working in the entire state of Francisco Morazon in all the different municipios, in all the different counties. That's municipio. And before we began the work, as I was told by the colonel in our initial meetings, less than 30% of special crimes were reported. Only about 12% of those ever made it to the court. And then only about 1% of those ever made it with a conviction in court. And the reasons for that were that the authorities didn't have the resources that they need. There wasn't confidence of the people to go to the authorities to get help, because they would go and no, they wouldn't get any help. Sometimes outright a victim will show up to present a report to the authorities and be told to go away, that they can't file a report. Unbelievable. That's the reality of life here. And so in addition to this, there's the corruption, there's negligence by the police, lack of resources, lack of knowledge of the laws and the procedures. That's pretty common. And so by beginning to teach the authorities and teach the people what the laws were and what their rights were and what they could do, and then to have somebody there, physically there in the police station, who could advocate for them and walk them through this whole process side by side with them. And then also training the locals, the authorities, training the people, giving help to the authorities in the form of resources, such as in our office we had computers so we could have the files and we could do the reports and we could manage the cases. I would meet regularly with the chief of the inspector's office, the investigation office, and meet regularly with the investigators and with the prosecutors, sometimes with judges over the cases. And also we would meet regularly with the colonel who was in charge of this area to make sure that cases, arrest warrants were gotten from the judge's office, make sure that arrest warrants were executed and that victims were actually rescued. To give you an example, many times if a child went missing, for example, a father finds out that a man took his daughter, maybe forcibly or maybe just took her, she's 12 years old, and he took her to be his wife or to have sex with her, he would go to the authorities to file a report, and the authorities would say, well, we don't have the resources, we don't have a vehicle, we don't have gas. When you know where she is, let us know and we'll go get her. That's what would happen. But because we had this office for victims, they would come in and we would do the investigation. We would go out and we would look for her. We would interview the people that needed to be interviewed. And I don't want this to sound like I'm saying that the government authorities are incompetent or all bad. There are a lot of really good police officers, a lot of really good investigators. There are a lot of really good prosecutors and judges. It's just the circumstances of the third world, without having resources, without having training. That's the majority of the problem. In addition to that, there is corruption and negligence, but the majority of the problem is resources, education, the ability to actually, if you have 2 police trucks for a population of 500,000 people over 10 counties, or maybe 5 police trucks in all of that, how are you going to answer all of the calls? You're not going to be able to. And so we would help the authorities with these things. And basically what began to happen was very interesting. prior to our office, there were only about 165 on average reports a year of special crimes. But over the first year, we had more than 600 reports, 500, 600 reports. And that's how it proceeded for the rest of the time that we had the office, was that we were having about 600 reports a year, 600 cases a year. And I began to get telephone calls because I would regularly work with the Supreme Court and had to send reports regularly to the President of the Supreme Court. The Fiscalia in Tegucigalpa, which is the office of the Attorney General's office, the Investigative Prosecutor's office. And so in all of those things, excuse me, the phone was just ringing, I had to turn it off. And I would have to report regularly to the generals in the National Police Headquarters. We worked with the Commissioner of Human Rights. And in all of this, I started beginning to get phone calls with them asking why the northern half of Francisco Morazon was suddenly such a hotbed of sex crimes, child abuse, domestic violence, and all of these other things. And it wasn't that the violence had increased. What had happened was the confidence of the people to report and seek help increased. Because one of the things that happened in November of 2006 is that the owner of the radio station in Talanga, Jose Hernandez from Radio Talanga, came to us and asked us to start a radio show. And we have had for 10 years now a radio show called A Life Without Violence to strengthen the family, create a culture of peace, identify victims of violence, what to do with violence, all of these themes that have to do with the justice program that we have here in Honduras. And so the news was getting out, the trainings we were doing with leaders in communities, with educators and health professionals and justice professionals and other people who are in leadership and in pastors and in churches where we go and preach about justice ministry. And the radio show too. All of this was bringing to the people information, bringing to the people knowledge that there is hope and that there is help. And so the success just grew for the ministry. We were then, what happened was the National Police Headquarters in Tagu began sending me around the country to train other officials. I would go to San Pedro, I would go to La Ceiba, I would go to Octopeque, I would go to Copan, other areas to train police, prosecutors, investigators, and judges on the laws and the procedures and the justice. Another thing that happened, because they frequently changed colonels and moved them around as we had different colonels and they got changed and moved to other areas, they then wanted this program, this pilot project, this model that we had created in other areas. And so I was taken to Olancho, which is the largest state in Honduras, and we opened up an office in Olancho and began attending victims, and the work began in Olancho. And then after that, another colonel who had worked with us previously was assigned to Lempira, which is on the other side of the country, and we opened up an office in Lempira. And so I was traveling between these three states, the one here where we live, and once a month to Olancho to review the cases, and once a month to Lempira to review the cases and do trainings and classes and events. In addition, every day we were on the telephone with the police officers we had assigned in our offices, and the justice work was going amazing, absolutely amazing. And here I was, Chief of Special Crimes in 3 states. We trained and helped them open offices in 3 other states, or departamentos as they're called in Honduras. And I told them I couldn't personally handle more than 3 states. This was pretty much my limit. So they ran those offices themselves. And there was a list of other offices that they wanted us to open. But it was amazing. And then the political crisis hit in 2009. And it became a little bit more difficult that year with the violence and turmoil that was going on with what they call it a coup. Some call it where you take the president out because he's committed violations. There's a lot of dissension, a lot of disagreement over what actually happened, but I'll just call it the political crisis. And it became more difficult to do the work, and we'll talk about more of that in our next episode. But while we were doing this work, one of the other things that we noticed as we were rescuing women and children is that there are no refuges, no albergues, shelters for women and children. There's a couple people who have small refuges here and there, but back in 2006 when we started, there was pretty much nothing. There was one in Tegucigalpa that was privately. It's called Calidad de Vida, and she was underfunded and could only house a couple women for a short period of time. And so these women, victims of violence, victims of rape, victims of whatever, when they came to Tolonga to file their reports, which in criminal cases they have to come to Tolonga, they were a long way from home, and maybe they had a baby in a cloth diaper and other children with them, or maybe they were alone but they had no money. Girl was raped at 6 o'clock at night, and the forensic doctor isn't available, or they finished her, taking her declaration and her forensics and all of that, and there's no buses for her to go home. And so these same victims who came for help now have to sleep on a bench outside the police station all night long. They have no food, they have no medicine, they're in the same clothes they were raped in, and there's nobody to help them, or else they have to start the walk home. And there are some that we know that live within a half an hour from Tolonga who did start walking home and became victims of another crime because they were walking alone at night on their way home. And the other thing was, we would rescue children and find out that there's no shelters for children. There's no place, if a child is rescued for sexual abuse, that same child, whether they're 6 years old, 2 years old, and yes, we have had 2-year-olds and 1-year-olds and 6-month-olds who've been raped. I'm gonna tell you the truth. It may be shocking, the things that it will be shocking. I'm not gonna say it's maybe shocking. I always ask people if I traumatize them after I talk to them, but the truth is the truth, and I'm going to tell you the truth. And so these women and these girls and these children and these babies would have to stay in the police station where there's drunks being arrested and murderers being arrested and drug traffickers being arrested, and there was no one to take care of them. There's a swinging door from the entrance to the police station where the guardia is. That's where the reception is. The swinging door goes inside the courtyard where the police dormitory rooms are. The police live at their work. They go home for 2 days every 15 days. So it's like a military institution. And the jail cells are there, and there's drunks, and there's 2-year-olds and 1-year-olds crawling around and toddling around. And one day, it struck me, the police ran through the swinging door, and as it swung open, it almost smashed into a baby that was crawling on the ground inside the courtyard inside. And so as a result of this, in 2007, November, we rented space in front of the police station for a shelter. And we hired a woman to take care of the victims over the night, to give them food and medicine, take them to the doctor if they needed to be taken to the doctor, take care of the babies, give bottles, clothes, to get them out of their rape clothes. Maybe they're sitting there in a skirt without underwear because the police took their underwear because there was evidence in the underwear. Give them a new pair of underwear. I know that sounds pretty basic, but that never happened before. Never happened before. Hungry all day long, doing declarations, doing evaluations, sitting on a bench, in public in front of everybody. We had the private office in the back where they could be taken care of. Lunch would come and go. Dinner would come and go. They'd have to stay all night on the bench. Morning would come, and so we would feed them, give them medicine, give them food, a new pair of underwear, bottles for their babies, diapers for their babies, whatever it is that they needed, and also be a person who was sitting alongside them, sharing the love of God, sharing the Word of God, hugging them if they needed to be hugged. I've had times where 12-year-olds who've been raped just sat and sobbed for hours and hours and hours in my arms. To know that there's somebody there at your side to walk through this scary, terrifying process, explaining what it is you need to do, going with you to the forensic doctor, holding your hand while yet another man is doing things down there because he's got to get the forensic evidence, You know, you just have no idea. And so we opened up this refuge and we fundraised and we bought property and we built a refuge. In 2010, the refuge was completed. So right here where I live, just 60 feet outside the back of my house here, is the refuge. So at any time of the day or night, police officers, prosecutors, investigators, judges even, will show up at the door and bring us a victim, and we will take care of them. Maybe they live in the mountains and they have to come to court, and it's going to be 8 o'clock in the morning is their court date, and they can't get here that early, so they have to come the day before and sleep in the yard outside the court. They don't have to do that anymore. They can come here and they can sleep here, and we'll take care of them. We'll go with them to court, and then we'll pay for their bus to go home and make sure that they're safe, giving them everything that they need in the process. We also opened up a children's home. When we came, we said we didn't want to have a children's home. Everybody has a children's home. But one of the things we discovered in rescuing women and children is that girls who are pregnant, there's no place for them to go. They would go to the government orphanage. I'd have a 10-year-old who's 5 months pregnant sitting in my office. Her mother sold her to men for sex to feed the family. The mother and one of the Johns are in the jail cell outside the office. The child is telling me all her mother did to her, and she's 5 months pregnant, 10 years old. I remember this case clearly. And she got sent to the government orphanage, which was like a prison. No love, no care, just a place to house her. I really don't know what happened to her after she left. But after case after case after case after case of finding out that pregnant girls were sent to this government orphanage, which was like a prison, we opened in 2010 a children's home only for girls pregnant by rape and incest. They have to be pregnant, and they have to be pregnant by rape and incest, because I know the heart and the mind of a woman who's pregnant by rape and incest. And so special care is needed for these girls. And right now, since 2010, and even today in 2017, we are the only children's home in the entire country that accepts girls with their babies. Other children's homes accept girls who've been raped and sexually abused. Other homes accept babies, but nobody accepts girls who are pregnant, period. We don't take the girls who run off with guys and get dumped pregnant or things like that. We only take girls who are pregnant by rape and incest. And then we've had special needs children too, because at the time in 2010 there weren't homes with special needs, but now, thank you, Lord, there are missionaries who are getting involved with taking care of special needs children. We're probably going to back off of that and focus mostly on the girls pregnant by rape and incest. So that tells you about the success of the work that we had, how we've been working nationwide. Here we came thinking we would only come to work in a village, had no idea the things that God was going to do, and we ended up impacting a nation. We have a children's home, and we have a refuge. In our next episode, I'm going to talk to you about the successes and the dangers and the things that happened with the office. So we'll be back next week.